So thank you very much for the introduction. Very good to be here. Wonderful to see all of you and to be in this wonderful city of Bengaluru. Namaskara, Yelalige, Suswagata, Nam Hesaru, Jian Xi, and I'm very happy to be in Nama Bengaluru. You can see that my tongue was struggling with all the R's and all the syllables, but I hope I did a good job with that. No, it's absolutely wonderful to be here. I am based in New Delhi, and I represent UNESCO, and very thankful for Guru for inviting me to give the keynote today. It's a very provocatively named title because EdTech Potential and Pitfalls, especially the way that EdTech is written up there on the screen, to me it's a challenge because UNESCO has made it clear, especially in recent publications, about the pitfalls perhaps and the risks around EdTech, and that the paradigm of techno-solutionism should not be the prevailing mindset taken by government policymakers, school administrators, school leaders, and even academics in their approach to looking at EdTech. So understanding that my mission is to provide maybe a critique and a critical start to the day, I just want to start firstly with unpacking what is the purpose of education in a few simple points, and then we'll look at what equity should be, and then looking at the paradigm of EdTech as it's spelled out there, EdTech, and then looking at what the evidence says. Okay, and then after that, present a few ways forward as well as a couple of questions that perhaps can guide the discussions throughout the day. So I think many of you here have some experience teaching. All of us here presumably have some experience in education. We are all, if we're here today, we're all learners. And I want to perhaps talk a bit about, firstly, what is the purpose of education and whether or not you agree with me about that. So from UNESCO's perspective, education is about human development, right? Educational goals must prioritize the process of learning as well as the outcomes, and that education processes model ways to live together. Live in peace together with mutual understanding and empathy and compassion. And schooling and education conveys a certain intrinsic values of the specific society, and hopefully also a greater values of like global citizenship. And it also identifies purposes for why students learn as well as what they learn. And these processes have dictated for a very long time how young people spend our time in schools, in education, whether or not they spend this time interacting with others in a social and physical environment, or perhaps, as COVID-19 showed us, isolated behind a screen, interacting through apps and platforms through digital interfaces. Simply put, education is about the human connection. It's about the human-centeredness. And I personally feel very strongly about that. I have to say that my first formative memory of education was actually when I started school at the age of 7, and it was a huge transition, very disruptive for me. I didn't like it. I was basically crying most days of the first few weeks that I started school. And my first, strongest, most powerful memory is of my teacher, Mrs. C, C as in acronym C, letter C. She hugged me, took me up, grabbed me, hugged me, carried me around the room while teaching the rest of the not so emotionally disturbed children for at least an hour. And I don't know about the time that elapsed, but my mom, observed from outside the classroom and told me this. But for me, that was actually the first formative, most powerful memory of education. At this point in time, I don't think that can be conveyed or done with educational technology, right? So that's just my sharing of a memory and the humanity of that. So I think furthermore, in India's context, one of the greatest educationists, economists, lawyers of the country in perhaps I would say modern India, has said that education is what makes a person fearless, teaches him the lesson of unity, makes him / her, they aware of their rights, and inspires them to struggle for their rights. And I'm sure many of you know who said that. It's Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. And I think that's very powerful because I wanted to mention that because that shows it's a common, theme, it's a value. You look at the greatest philosophers, educationists in all countries, there will be some vein, similar thought and value encapsulated in their philosophies. We see education as a common good, not just a public good, but a common good that is relational in approach, where everyone needs to have a voice in its decision making, in its processes, in its approaches, and what is measured and what is valued. And overall, UNESCO has found that this right to education, as is defined in what I said earlier, is under threat from different areas or aspects. So finally, I think also one thing that has struck me in my time in India so far is how education permeates everything, including the movie industry. And I think it's very important to share also that in the cultural capital of India, education is also seen as something more than just a path to wealth or affluence. And a famous actor, character has said, and I don't say this in Hindi, I say this as a translation I understand of what was said in Hindi. Study to be accomplished, not affluent. Pursue excellence and success will follow you. And I'm sure some of you, again, I can see you're registering who said that. It's a very famous rancho, also known as Funsuk Wangdu, from The Three Idiots, which was my required consumption when I landed in India. So, and it's a marvelous movie. I mean, I could watch it endlessly. So just setting out this broad, frame of where I'm coming from. I think also when we talk about the theme of today, not just the title of my keynote, is that it says EdTech for equity, right? So I feel obliged to define, coming from my legal background in my past life, equity is about providing each student with the necessary resources and opportunities they need to achieve their full potential, recognizing that personal or social circumstances like gender, ethnic origin, family background should not be barriers. And equitable outcomes often require differential treatment, resource redistribution, so as to achieve a level playing field among all individuals and communities, which I think is captured very well by Dr. Ambedkar's life work. So, having said that, when we talk about EdTech, I think we have examined, and the literature is very clear, that when you look at the how EdTech is written as it is on the screen now, it firstly does not even bother spelling out what is education, right? Some researchers, such as Selwyn, have said that the language matters. What we hear and how we use short forms of, what is a technology or what is a solution or tool matters. And here, tech, is the prominent part of the short form. And this is characteristic of a certain type of thinking coming from Silicon Valley, Global North, financial industries, where the focus is on monetization of technology, health tech, fintech, ed tech, med tech, and agri-tech as well. It is not the preferred way that I will refer to education technology. And there are a myriad of ways that technology has been described in academic literature and how it has percolated into the media, mass media, and common use. And I think it's important to bear in mind that EdTech is not synonymous with education technology or technology for learning or technology-enhanced learning or technology-enhanced education. It carries a very specific paradigm. So I may have misunderstood. I did not check with Guru, but I think he did this, or they, IT for Change, did this very wisely and intentionally, that we need to be careful about what we mean by EdTech, right? And just to localize and to share a bit about what sociologists in India have found, I mean, Bhatia, Arora, and Gupta published an article in 2024 where they did an ethnography of digital learning experiences of marginalized communities in Bengaluru, Delhi, and Mumbai. And basically found that EdTech platforms that they have been able to access undermine what the students need in and around their place of learning during COVID. And this is mainly a product of the standardization approach, the scaling approach, the efficiency justification of EdTech that clashes very strongly with the messiness of learning and education in a school, which is primarily a human endeavor. It's a social endeavor. On the other hand, and I don't want to come across as too one-sided, we see that technology can provide opportunities for learning. So this is not EdTech. I'm saying technology can provide opportunities for learning, which UNESCO has also highlighted, right? And this is, for example, I think Wikipedia. Started as a dream 25 years ago, I think today is widely recognized and even permitted to be cited, as authoritative literature worldwide. And I personally saw that because back in the day, Wikipedia teachers told us, no, you're not allowed to use it. Don't refer to it. If you refer to it, you're doing it furtively, right? It's like in the background, I'm doing a Google search. It's not something that we acknowledge has actually become a very widely trusted, open and transparent system of capturing knowledge in over, I think, 20 languages. There are many languages that have more than 1 million articles, for example, and there are overall 55 million freely accessible articles, and it's the 4th most visited website worldwide, and has certainly contributed to the learning of AI, large language models today. I think in Kerala as well, we have talked about how wiki software has been used in schools, which is the School Wiki initiative, and it has connected 15,000 schools for collaborative content development. Wiki is something that I think many of us have also engaged in and used over the course of my learning, for example. I'm sure your personal or professional learning. So technology has potential. It also has severe pitfalls. what does the evidence say about educational technology? And in a global research from 2023, UNESCO has found that basically it's mixed. There's no blanket approach, there's no standard answer. Educational technology has shown mixed, uneven impacts and outcomes globally. This is in direct contradiction to what you will hear or have heard from the edtech industry, right? Which is that it will lead to efficiency gains. There will be improved learning outcomes. There will be time saved by teachers in their work or by school management. If we look at the greatest unintended experiment of remote learning, and by implication also low-tech and high-tech digital education, digital learning during COVID, UNESCO has found again that out of the 1.7 billion students that were learning before COVID occurred, about half had no access to learning, whether or not low-tech or high-tech. So that's huge, right? That's huge. That's basically 2/3 the population of India. A third of pupils did not have effective access to distance learning, right? So it did not facilitate their learning. And we see that in large-scale learning assessment outcomes and also national assessments, where by PISA, the PISA Global Assessment of Learning, found for OECD countries and other partner countries, found that basically numeracy, literacy skills decreased on average by 4 to 6% globally after COVID, post-COVID. Learning losses have been documented between 3 months to 9 months among students, again, globally. So I think that is, in simple language and in brief, encapsulates perhaps the failure of education technology, whether or not it was high-tech or low-tech, and that it did not work. It did not serve the purposes of education, even when you're only looking at education through the frame of learning gains. It did not work, right? So I think we have to be very clear about that. On the other hand, right, we see that in terms of language learning, which I think is a very important topic for India, there's considerable evidence that indicates that when you learn, especially as a speaker of a minority language, and you're not learning in the language of instruction, for example, it's very important for the student to observe the enunciation and the framing of the words that are being taught by the teacher beyond just digital learning transmission through a screen. If you do not have access to that, then there's a lot of difficulty in a minority language speaker being able to connect new sounds and words that make up the language of instruction or majority language. Also, a lot of interactions happen in the corridors of schools, in the hallways, in the playgrounds, in the canteens. That, again, is something that's mostly lost if we look at remote digital learning. There is a lot of emphasis on infrastructure inputs globally, and India is not an exception to that. And that's important. We are distinguishing here teaching through technology and teaching about technology. I think you need infrastructure inputs to teach about technology. And in that sense, India has done fantastically over the past 2 to 3 decades, where electrification of schools now, according to latest UDI's data, is 93%, 93.6%. Computer facilities across the country are roughly 2/3 of schools, so 64.7%, and internet connectivity is 63%. And this has increased tremendously over the past 2 decades. And I think that's also complemented by how education is framed in the national education policy as, broadly speaking, looking at education holistically. And the curriculum is being adjusted in accordance with the national education policy that tries to incorporate, I think, a more holistic vision of education, a thicker, broader version of education than just about learning outcomes. Lastly, my last point about research and what research has shown is about AI, because that would be a big, gap if I don't talk about that. MIT Media Labs in June 2025 published a pre-peer-reviewed version of their research that looked at undergraduate students' use of AI, Google searches, and totally no-tech approaches to essay writing. And they basically found that over the course of 3 months, those who used generative AI tool like ChatGPT would first start with using it as an ideating tool, as an ideating counterpart, which kind of matches with some of the, recommended pedagogical approaches that we see in the media and early research. By the end of the 3rd month, the students were copying and pasting the entire essay and submitting that to their teachers, right? And that was, obviously, that's not an ideal outcome for the use of AI in essay writing skills. In contrast, the brain-only group and the Google search-only group continued largely the same way that they practiced essay writing, which is, brain-only is obviously just writing and typing based on what they learned. And then the Google search group would use Google searches to obtain information, analyze, compare, and prioritize and synthesize information to put their essays together. What is most interesting is that they combine this with a MRI approach. So they MRI as a way to examine how different parts of the brain lit up when these students were using different approaches. So more from a neuroscience approach, which is very interesting, not my area of expertise, but I think it's worth sharing with you that they came to the conclusion that when you're using AI, generative AI tools, your brain is not lighting up in the areas that lead to memory formation, encoding, synthesis, or analysis, right? So different parts of the brain are lighting up when you're activating, when you're using AI to support, when they were using the AI to support their essay writing process. And that's very worrying. So this is early research, relatively recent research, but I think the evidence should be recognized and should govern perhaps a more cautious and informed approach to the next hype technology, which is AI. Briefly speaking, I do want to also mention that the evidence continues to show that education technology does not fix inequalities. So when we're talking about equity, adding this additional input or requirement of education technology is going to exacerbate inequalities. And this is what the evidence clearly shows globally. We all agree that there is a digital divide, and it's not an inputs-only digital divide. It's not just an infrastructure input digital divide. It's also a skill divide. It's also a familiarity. It's also a social divide, because parents from low-income backgrounds, lower socioeconomic backgrounds, don't have the time nor the knowledge, right, to support children in learning digitally. If you come from a lower socioeconomic background, during COVID, you didn't have a quiet space to study, to access your lessons on a phone that may have been prioritized for your parents' work, your family members' work, or if you have a male and female sibling, for the boy. This is all well known. This is trite evidence, but it's also important to mention that. And I think in India's context again, when we talk about inequalities, yeah, there are some categories that have been, such as scheduled tribes, scheduled castes, OBCs, where the dropout rate in education is 2 to 3 times higher than that of the general category. And so by layering technology onto these inequalities, we're not going to bridge the gap, right? It's important to understand that as well. There has to be very intentional use and decision making of technology. What happens is that the Matthews effect, right, where the idea of compounding advantages over time will advantage those who already start with privilege and opportunity, will manifest. It will happen. So that's very, very clear. On the other hand, again, an example from India is IGNOU, which has documented representation from students of rural areas of 45%, 18% from SC and 18% from 18% from SC as well. So there are opportunities where intentional use of online learning can give opportunities to those that historically have limited access to learning opportunities. But I think IGNOU also is not pure online learning. There's a whole infrastructure of centers, examination and assessment centers and bodies that are open all around the world, not just in India, but also in other countries. And that is something that is not to be neglected. Lastly, I think before I end, I want to address the fact about teachers, right? So education technology, from what social science and sociologists have found, does not reduce teachers' work. I've seen that in my own reviews of technology in education in multiple countries, where actually the time that teachers talk about spending on figuring out technology and making it work, let's say for mathematics class, is spent outside of the classroom. So I present that point because firstly, there is a certain narrative that is propagated that says teachers are resistant to technology. They are resistant. They are not accepting of change. They're not accepting of training. They are not willing to accept technology in their classroom. And that diminishes the authority of teachers, the agency, and the professionalism of teachers in the classroom and what they know best for the students and children that they observe every day. But also that they will commit, if they believe in and how technology can support students' learning, they will commit to it far above and beyond their official teaching hours, which is testament to their commitment. So, for example, in this country that I was in, I talked to multiple teachers. Despite the computer lab having a power trip every time more than 20 computers were switched on, despite the fact that they only had mobile broadband on their phone, that they didn't have a device that they used at home, the gentleman spent multiple months figuring out what are the effective tools that are publicly and open source, freely open source software to help visualize chemistry principles for his students in classroom. This is secondary school. And he would share that through a WhatsApp group with parents as well as students in his class. So in terms of AI, I know I'm running over time, but it's also important that this is reflected equally in recent research on the use of generative AI in the classroom. So teachers find that it's not sufficient to just have better prompts to produce a good lesson plan or individualized learning plan for, let's say, an autistic student, because the generative tool doesn't recognize that certain practices have been tried and tested and actually make learning more difficult for the student. So what is tried and what is produced actually needs to be assessed, analyzed, and then heavily revised by teachers. This was in Sweden and Australia over the course of as part of the preparation for lessons. So we need to respect that teachers' prior experiences of what works and also their localized judgments of what is appropriate, useful, and feels right actually is an integral part of education and needs to be respected. So maybe then I would end with 4 questions and I promise this is the last minute that I'm going to spend on this. 4 questions to guide our discussions today. So when we talk about education technology, is the use of education technology appropriate for the national and local context, bearing in mind that you need to add value to support the strengthening of education systems and aligning with learning objectives? Is the use of education technology leaving learners behind? Knowing that the answer is generally yes. So technology use needs to enable access, learning for those with disabilities, and accelerate some learning outcomes where appropriate and where the evidence supports such practice. Is the use of education technology really scalable? And lastly, will the use of education technology be sustainable in this particular education system that we're referring to? And I hope that as part of these discussions today, we can then ensure that technology ends up serving education and not the other way around. Thank you very much.